Of the return to competition sessions. Really excited. Today is the day we can all get started back at some events. And first up, I know a lot of people are really excited that our time trial events will get started. One of the biggest things in our inboxes at the moment is everybody getting excited about time trials. So this is a great way to kick off our sessions. So today you've got myself hosting. My name's Ashley Ryan, if you don't know me already, and I'm the Workforce Officer. And you've inundated with support tonight. We've got Morven Brown, the events manager, is manning the technical side. And we've also got Maddie, who is supporting us as an interim events admin support, and Craig, who is one of our CDCs like Maddie is. So they're from the club development team. So they're here to support. They won't be able to answer all our technical questions, so bear with them, but they are here to help us out tonight. We also have a special guest tonight, Glenn, who should be popping in soon if he isn't already here, which is really exciting to have a bit of partnership working there with CTT and hear about how they've been running events down south. So last two bits of housekeeping really are that I'll be recording the session tonight so that those that have missed it will be able to catch up on YouTube. And the last thing is questions are most welcome. Please put them in the chat. If they're going to be addressed later on, we'll hold them, or we'll have a big open question and answer right at the end as well. So hopefully we'll be able to have a really good chat and really good discussion tonight. So what's happening? Really briefly go over guidance, hardly going to spend a minute on it, and then moving straight into a little update about training and CPD in general. Then Glenn should be able to unmute and have a chat to us about his experience. Then we will go on, and there's a few discussion points that we're going to go into breakout rooms for and talk about different areas that the restrictions that are still in place might affect us and how we think in reality we'll be able to work around them and be safe. And lastly, just those questions that I mentioned. So we've got an hour in tonight. Depending on how the discussion goes, it might take more or less than an hour. We'll just see how it goes. But we'll just get started. So guidance updates. Hopefully you're all familiar with this. This is just directly lifted from the updates we got last week. So just sharing this again, just to remind you all that guidance updates, as you know, change all the time, but hopefully this is on a downhill back to normality now. These updates do go straight onto the website. They also go out on social media, and we send them out directly in a newsletter from the events team. If you're not on that mailing list, please let us know at our email address, events@scottishcycling.org.uk, and we'll be able to put you on that so you can get these updates straight away. But a couple of things I just wanted to highlight there are travel restrictions. We'll all know this, have been lifted as of today, so we're on mainland Scotland able to travel about, and competitions back on, which is why we're here. And lastly, something that might come up as a discussion point later on, just wanted to highlight there that maximum number of people involved in the event is capped at 200. And that's not 200 riders, that's 200 people involved in general, officials, volunteers, any hangers on that need to be there, such as parents and guardians, not that they'd like being called hangers on, and then the riders on top of that. So that's all I really wanted to say on guidance, because I think we're all really on top of that. Training and CPD. So I think it's quite important to highlight some of the things that are going on here, because this webinar isn't the only thing going on. So I know there's a few different groups of people that are here tonight, from officials and event organisers and other volunteers. But for officials, there are the UCI and British Cycling webinars that you can go to. British Cycling run a national webinar quarterly, and the UCI have been running things, and British Cycling actually shared those UCI recordings in their last Commissaire Matters. So if you're wanting a little extra studying time, if you didn't get them first time round, you can have a look at those. the big changes, British Cycling will be publishing online modules soon. These are actually aimed at trainees and for the trainees to go through their courses online, but current officials will be able to see them and use them as a review and a refresher. So that should be launched soon. We should get another Commissaire Batters newsletter sharing that news too. And also obviously our Scottish Cycling website webinars. For event organisers, there's webinars as well. New event organiser training is going to be shared with everybody, and it's at the end of July, and it's aimed at people that are putting on their first event next year. And there'll also be a troubleshooting session for the event management system, because I know a lot of people find some of those bits quite tricky. Other volunteers, we couldn't put on events without this full team, and so it really depends on the discipline, but there will be training either on site or online depending on the discipline. It might be run by us, it might be run by the associations or the particular event organizer if it's relevant to them. So you just need to keep an eye out, and we'll share what we can in the newsletter when we know it's happening. And obviously the webinars can be quite relevant to any volunteer depending what the subject is too. So that's really what's going on with training in CEPD. Actually quite busy when you look at it in one page like that, which is quite exciting. But on with the main event. What are we chatting about today? We are chatting about time trials. So is Glenn there? Hello, Glenn.
Hi, yeah, it's Ashley. Yes, I am.
Oh, great. I'm trying to find you on my camera as well. Have you got a camera, Glenn?
I have, yeah.
I will stop sharing my screen then so that we can see your lovely face.
Oh, I wouldn't do. Oh, it's not so lovely, I'm afraid.
No pressure. Where has my meeting control gone? Just lost everything.
You can just see your PowerPoint at the moment.
I know, I'm trying to shut it down, but I'm fumbling because I can't. Oh, it's on the other. The problems with having two screens. There we go.
Oh.
There, I can see you now.
Ace.
So yes, this is Glenn. He is one of the directors at CTT. So we're really quite excited to have you here tonight, Glenn. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
No problem.
Yeah, take it away.
If I give you some background first, as Ashley said, I'm one of the CTT directors, was nominated onto the board this last year, so end of last year. Throughout 2020, my club's risk assessment on top of that. So, I mean, the things to talk about really is there's quite a few different things to look at in terms of relaunching your events. It's we're finding that riders themselves are very, very keen to get going, as you would expect. And actually, for the most part, they seem to be quite willing to do whatever it is you ask them to, obviously within reason, to ensure that the events are run successfully. And so we need to, when we're running events, we need to look at it from a number of different angles. In the angle of making sure that we keep our volunteers safe, making sure that we keep all of our participants safe, but also making sure that the outward view of what it is that we're doing is acceptable to those that might be looking in from the outside. And you know, that I think a lot of that comes down to common sense, and a lot of the things that we've been doing personally, you know, you guys will have been doing them as well, you know, wearing masks, sanitizing your hands, you know, making sure that our riders don't congregate in groups, shifting them on as quickly as possible. One of the things that we've had difficulty with in getting our events going this year, and I've noticed it more this year as opposed to last year, we didn't have such an issue last year, is premises. So finding somebody who's willing to allow us to use their premises for a headquarters. Sorry, just turn that off. so I've had to have some discussions with some of the owners, or parish councils or school operators, and explain to them what our processes are, to allow them to allow us to rent the space out for a headquarters. So I think that's probably the biggest difficulty at the moment. Our process for a HQ is we actually don't use the building anymore, other than for toilets, if there's toilets available. So we pop up a gazebo outside, we create a one-way system, we tape off the rest of the headquarters. So once we've presented our risk assessment to the premises, they're generally okay with it. We're running an event. We were running an event yesterday, and one of the questions which I had from the owner was, well, what happens if Mrs. Smith down the road complains about more than 30 people being in a group? And so I talked her through our risk assessment and explained what we were going to do as part of our process, explained that it's an organised sporting activity, so it doesn't fall under the standard groupings in the garden and things like that. So and they were okay with that. They just needed that information to make sure that they could go back to the people who might be complaining and say, actually, it is all okay. We've kind of tested our process in that we had a police visit to one of our events last year, and I kind of spoke through that with the police constable, and actually went away and he was quite happy. So I think as long as we are applying common sense, and we send out our rider manual, which is what I call it, a rider manual. It tells people not to arrive too early. It gives them a time when they're allowed to arrive at the start location. We have distance markers, which are just, I'm a coach as well, so I've got all sorts of coaching material. So I just use these rubber discs that we put on the ground, and they're basically waiting in there 2 meters apart, and no more than 6 people in the start area at any one time. Which is, we can do that with time trials, but we can't do that with mass start events like some of the track and cyclocross and things like that. So it makes it a bit more difficult. But my experience is purely with time trialing. So yeah, that's really kind of my experience, I guess, in that we've created these processes to keep crowds down to a minimum, to keep groupings down to a minimum, to make people coming feel safe. For example, we have two baskets, one full of pens, one that the pens go into once they've been used. So people sanitize their hand, take a pen, sign on, chuck it in the bin that's been emptied. We've got like 4 sets of numbers where so we're running, I was actually running an event tonight, which I completely forgot about. And so I left my partner to deal with that. And we had to use a different set of numbers to the ones we were using yesterday. And that's part of our process. So the numbers come back, we stick them in a box, we put a lid on it, and they stay in there for 2 weeks, because we're fortunate enough that we've got a number of different sets of numbers. And then tonight we've used a different set of numbers to the ones we used yesterday. And the same process again, they'll go into a box, the lid will go on, and they'll sit in our storage container for 2 weeks. So it's just a lot of things like that, really. People wearing masks, making sure that they're approaching the desk with their masks on, making sure that the officials in the start areas are wearing masks. And we've had to do away with pusher offs. So we don't, we only employ a standing start now. And actually, the first event we did, we had a couple of grumbles about it, and a few people trying to do track stands and things like that. So and I think once the riders got used to the new processes, they were just grateful to be racing. Because as an organizer, we have incurred additional cost, because we've had to buy all these, all the PPE. We've had to make sure that our volunteers feel safe, and we've had to buy extra number packs. We've had to buy packs of pens and things like that. So we are incurring additional cost, and I think the people that are coming to the events kind of appreciate the effort that's going to. And now this second time round, we're seeing a hell of a lot more events being put on, and we're seeing completely full fields. We had an event in the area this weekend, just gone on Saturday, and it had reserve riders, which we very rarely see outside of the big championship events. And the event I did yesterday, we had 120 riders, which is our limit really. And then even our club events, we're seeing 60, 70 riders for those. So people just want to race, and I think we just need to make sure that we keep it as safe as possible. And I probably have floated across what we've done, and I'm happy to answer any questions if people want to put them in the chat. And I'll be here for the whole duration, or even answer any questions that anybody might have now, any specific ones.
Yeah, if anybody has questions for Glenn, feel free to put them in the chat. It's great you're going to stay, Glenn, because you can come into the breakout rooms as well and maybe get a bit in more detail there. Yeah. But you're saying you skirted over things, but there's some really good points in there to highlight, even about the pen baskets, things like that. How are you going to manage that? Is there another way we can do it up here, perhaps? Yeah, we'll see what people chat with. Martin's raised his hand.
Hi, Glenn. The events you're running, are they entry on the day or just prior entry only?
So all of our events are prior entry, and actually we did, I'm not quite sure what the structure is up there. We have type A and type B events, so club events and then the open events. So is it the same structure you guys have up there? No?
Or some of the midweek leagues are entry on the night.
Yeah, so we made a conscious decision actually. My club is a fairly new club. And actually, we made a conscious decision that we would not do entry on the night. So when COVID came along, we were already prepared. So we've created systems which allow online registration. We've got our online payment, and actually the riders seem to prefer that, or at least that's what we're finding. And a lot of the other local clubs have done a similar thing. And being able to send out a rider list in 24 hours or even 48 hours before the event means that the riders aren't congregating, they're not all turning up. So previously at a club event, the sign-on would open at 6:15 and close at 7:15, and then the timekeepers would run off and get into place for 7 o'clock, ready to go. So that means that everybody that was coming was there between 6:15 and 6:45. So we had to try and avoid that. So most clubs that run what we call a type B event or a club event or your midweek events have actually taken to doing online registration, to the point where as a body, CTT now have started to allow club events to take online registration through our online registration system. So we've actually taken it one step further, and actually what we're finding is that because people know what time they're riding, they're not turning up 2 hours early and hanging around in the car park, which is solving a couple of problems for us. A, we know how many people are coming, so we can manage it. B, we can tell everybody that they're not allowed, what time we want to see them at the start line. So we give them a 6-minute window when they're allowed to be at the start line. And it also means that we're preparing and making sure that the space that we're using is appropriate for the amount of people that are coming.
Thanks for that. That's really good detailed response there, Glenn. A question from the chat. Kevin was wondering what process was used for number allocation.
Yeah, so in terms of the actual handing out of the numbers, we have somebody at for want of a better word, a registration desk, who's got a list of the riders that have already registered previously. In the same way that we would with an open event, a weekend event, in that somebody comes, they know what their number is, the person has them laid out, and they're signing them in and out when they return and bring their numbers back. So they are sanitizing their hands before they come out, before they hand their numbers out. They're then putting it onto a space on the table and then kind of stepping back so there's no close contact. And then when the numbers come back, they're thrown into a bin or a box. So there's no contact from the official once it's been used by the participant. And then normally me as the race director comes and puts the lid on the box and takes it home. So there's no physical contact with that number once it's been in contact with the rider.
Okay. Kevin, I hope that covers it, but if it doesn't, we can pick it up in the group discussions. Does anybody else have any questions for Glenn at the moment?
Ashley, can I go back to what Martin was saying?
Yes,
Barry.
Hi, Barry.
Can I go back to what Martin was saying? Obviously, what Glenn's talking about is club events and open events. They're A and B. So their B events are the same as our confined events. But the difference that we have up here is, like, for instance, our midweek series is actually the equivalent of an A event down in CTT.
Okay.
And the reason that we've had it as sign on the night, but it's classed as an open event, so that obviously our riders can still use those times for BARs, vets, standards, etc., which you can't do with a confined event or a level B event in CTT. And one of my concerns is, obviously, as you know, we do sign on the night for those A events, which you can't do through CTT. But my one concern is if we make it open online, then we've got lots of riders that could be entering, because there is an appetite for races at the moment, lots of riders who could be entering from all over Scotland to come to our midweek events. And then obviously our local guys are kind of getting pushed out, because a lot of them are maybe a wee bit older and don't, I know for a fact that there are some of them just don't use a computer to enter, but obviously I can understand why we would be doing that to obviously reduce it, but it's obviously, that is one query that I've had raised by our members, is whether or not we can still have sign on the night or not.
So I mean, the way that my club does it is we have a Google sheet that we use to sign on, and we set a limit on that. So if we say, for example, if we know we've got 40 spaces on an evening, depending on the sunset hours, obviously, then we can limit that to 20. So we can say we know we've got 20 spaces that aren't going to get used by the online system. So we can leave those to one side to allow us to allocate them on the night.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hope that covered it, Barry. Is there anything else?
No, at the moment that's fine. Now, obviously, similar to my thoughts last year when we were thinking about going back, was obviously there was a lot of talk about disposable numbers, which obviously you're then having to send them out, etc. So my plan had still been to use our ordinary numbers, but to put them in a bucket of soapy water or whatever when riders came back, so that you weren't actually having to handle them. I also wondered if, I know a lot of guys use the Aero pockets, but for those that use pins, if it was worthwhile obviously asking riders to bring their own pins for their own number and their own pen for sign on, so that we weren't having to obviously have 40, 50, 60 pens sort of thing. So
yeah, I mean, we do the same. We don't give out pins. We tell them to bring their own. We ask them to bring their own pens. But like I said, we have the sanitized before use, and then it goes in a bucket. I mean, I'm happy to share a copy of my club's rider manual after this process with Ashley, and Ashley can decide if that's suitable for distribution.
Yeah, I think people will be able to pick out what's relevant and what's not relevant. So your other concern, well, not other concern, but your other concern, Barry, about who actually gets picked if you have it open online. You remember, as the organizer, you get to choose who officially gets through. So if you know that you've got 20 local people that want to enter, they get the places first before the people traveling from whatever. So that's totally up to your discretion. So I wouldn't worry about that, but you're right, there is that barrier of technology for people that are not used to it. So that is worth highlighting.
We have discussed in the past changing our events to being a pre-entry. It's been discussed for the last couple of years, and a lot of the riders, what they quite like is, because if they're at work and they get held up at work, then they've not pre-entered and lost their money because they then can't get there. But on the opposite extent, sometimes they think they're going to be working late and then they get finished early, and then because it's sign on the night, they can get to the event. But I totally agree with, if you have pre-entry, then you've not got obviously a lot of people congregating to sign on at the same time, because you can spread it out more like what we would do at a weekend event, if you know what I mean. So
yeah. Okay, if that is all the questions for Glenn for the moment, he is hanging around with us, so we've not lost his knowledge there. And and I will put my presentation back on. If Craig, I'm nominating you to let me know that it's working properly. Once it gets up and running. Craig, am I good to go?
I've still not seen anything yet.
Not getting this screen shared today, am I?
Slow and steady wins the race.
That's right.
Yep. Oh, you're on your. Yep, there we go. You've got the notes showing there though.
Did it the wrong way round. Stop share. This was all smooth earlier, guys, I promise you. Right. Let's try swapping things. You know what? I'm cutting out the middleman and taking my second screen off because that is causing the problems here. Meeting. Share screen. Share screen. Share screen. Share screen.
And we're in.
That should be it now. Right. So thank you very much to Glenn again. So fun part, we're all going to get into our different rooms and have a really good chat about how we think this is all going to work in practice, what things have been bugging you that you're thinking, how are we going to do that? Or if you've seen a good idea somewhere that you want to share. So we're going to split into 3 groups. Craig, Maddie and Morven are going to be in each room as well and just talking about these topics. The first group is kind of that pre-event stuff. Rider entry, how's it going to work for your event? Are you going to have open on the day? Are you going to be strictly online? How rider briefing is going to work? How are you going to get information to people? Is it purely just a manual or are there other ways to do it? Group 2 is going to talk about the start line. What's the start line process going to be? I've heard from different organisers different ways that they're going to do it, and obviously CTT have taken that decision just to have that standing start and no holder on our pushers. And group 3 going to talk about that results and dispersal of the bodies right at the end of that post event. And if you get through that chat, just having the general chat about, is there any other areas that are you really want to highlight? How's that going to work? What are we going to do there? And if there's any concerns, further concerns that you want to discuss. So we're going to have 10 minutes in the room for a chat and nominate one person to feedback to the whole group when we come back would be really great and really great to hear your thoughts. So with no further ado, Morven Brown, could you split us into groups, please? People take a camera picture of the questions if you want.
Perfect. If everyone's ready, I will start the breakout rooms just now.
Right, hello. I'll just wait one wee minute just to make sure everybody's back and their audio and video and things are back on. So, group 1, Morven's room. Who's feeding back? Who got voluntold?
It was me that got volunteered, Ashley.
Hi,
That's a
Matt.
surprise, eh?
So what was the chat?
So we both basically were speaking about, we covered a couple of things. We obviously covered about riders physically signing on for if there was a way that they could do that without actually having to sign on at the desk to keep the contact a bit lower. So obviously Morven highlighted that BC have obviously set up a system that through the online entry that people could sign on. But one of the things that we raised about that was, well, what would happen if at the present moment, if somebody doesn't turn up, they're entered, but they don't turn up, we can see that straight away on a sheet that they've not entered. And therefore, if a rider's late for their number, you can slot them into that empty space. So what Morven was saying is obviously what's still been happening is that you probably still need somebody to have a drive-through system or something like that, so that you know that they are there, although that they're actually legally signed on from an insurance point of view, but just to have somebody ticking off that they've arrived and obviously they've picked up their number. There was a bit of discussion about numbers, and one of the things was obviously, I think it was Debbie was saying that they're due to have an event and they weren't sure about, obviously they were thinking about not giving numbers out, because obviously how do you get a number onto the back of your jersey without asking somebody else to pin that on? But obviously what we were saying is we feel it's quite important for a few reasons, because obviously they were going to get riders to shout their numbers as they cross the finish line. But having been a timekeeper for many years, there's obviously lots of riders as they cross the finish line have got no energy left to shout their number. So we still feel that numbers are important. Obviously, a lot of the guys have now got pockets in their skin suits that they can get them in, but that they'll maybe need to try to find some way of managing to pin their number onto their self. But when they collect the number, either to do as Glenn was suggesting, in that the number's washed and then put on the table for the rider to pick up, or to have a washing line effect, was what Henrik said he had seen at an event where the numbers were pinned up and then the rider could just go and take the number, but the organizer or the sign-on clerk would see that the correct numbers were being taken. And then definitely to have a bucket of disinfectant or something for to put their sweaty number at the end, because there is no way I want to touch any of those sweaty numbers. Obviously, I think that was most of what we spoke about. Oh, we spoke about that in time trials, that in road races and circuit races, riders are generally briefed before they go to the start, whereas in time trials, because of the nature of event, they don't have a rider briefing generally. So we're going to have to make sure that all the COVID information and the extra information is obviously put on maybe the club website, or as well as being put in the race manual that is sent to the riders, so that they know what to expect. And it would only be any change that had maybe happened just prior to the event starting. You know, if you turn up in the morning and then there's something happened, that you would have to then, whoever was at the desk would have to, when they were collecting the number, obviously get that information across. But that a lot more information is going to have to go into the race manuals to obviously let the riders know what's expected of them, i.e. what time they're allowed to get to the start, because I think some of the start areas probably won't have a lot of room if you're having them socially distanced, to have riders obviously spread out. So you might, as Glenn said, only get a couple of riders, you know, at the start line. So obviously giving them the time that they're expected to be there. I think that was everything.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Very comprehensive from your group.
I think, sorry, just one point to add. I think Debbie, you had mentioned that in your race, or your time trial tomorrow, you suggested that riders have to wear a mask until basically to the start, and then they have to effectively stuff the face mask into their skin suit, so they that they are wearing a mask at all time as well, obviously to keep everybody safe, but also to demonstrate to the public that safety is adhered to.
Okay, Craig's room, the little muddle with the with who was looking after what question, but would somebody from Martin's room just like to Craig's room, which I think Martin, you stuck your hand up to volunteer in the end, just share in general what you guys were talking about.
I managed to avoid the stampede. So,
I know.
So for the start, it was discussed what you do instead of a holder. And we thought the best way was for all riders to have their foot on the ground where they're being counted down, because then everyone's got the same challenge to get clipped in and up and away. But the person who potentially would have been your holder is then a few meters back, corralling the next few riders, so that when the starter calls up rider number 2, they can make sure number 2 is ready and sends them forward if they are at the start and ready to go. But you'd need to restrict the amount of riders that are in that corral at any one point, trying to keep the number of people in that area down to 5 or 6. So it's up to the riders to be responsible with their time, knowing their own time when they're due to start. And one of the things we discussed was that having the online entry through using Messenger, so that the riders have pre-information of exactly what time they start. So you're trying to encourage them to come up, pick up the number, get ready to start, race, come back, drop off the number and go. Because you don't want them hanging around at the start or at the finish after the events, and then using the same sort of medias for processing the results afterwards. That this is it. We're not going to be announcing the results at the end, so there's no need for you to stay. It's you come, you race, you go, and your results will be posted as soon as we can on a forum that everyone can easily have access to. We spoke about the finish as well. I don't know if that's our remit or not to speak about the finish.
You can share what you had.
But it's obviously you'll have your timekeeper at the finish and a recorder, and to avoid shouting, which is advised at the moment, that the recorder could potentially use a radio for speaking to the timekeeper, not expecting a response, otherwise Barry will shout at them. And another observer some 20 meters after the finish, just to make a double check on the numbers as they pass, in case you're getting groups coming across. The more people doing that job, will just make it easier for the timekeeper if there's any challenges to who crossed the line in what order and what their numbers were.
Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. Maddie's room. We've only got 5 minutes left, but if anybody wants to stay and chat longer, feel free. But who would like to be back from Maddie's room?
We actually didn't assign anyone in the group. We kind of ran out of time a little bit, but unless anyone is really keen to feedback, I don't know. We were lucky enough to have Glenn in our group, so I don't know if Glenn would be kind enough to share with everyone kind of what he shared with us in the group.
Yeah, I mean, the things we talked about is really around the final of the, getting back and dishing your number back and not hanging around in the parking area. So we have a social distancing officer, and their responsibility at the headquarters is to ensure that people aren't congregating, that they're not sitting on their tailgate with their cup of coffee and their lunch, because that's what they've done for the last 40 years, and that they're vacating the area as quickly as possible, making sure that there's not groups congregating of more than 6 for us, and that those that aren't doing it for very long, and that they're also socially distancing. I use an online results tool, and like I said earlier, we have a QR code which they scan, and they can see the live results as they happen from their mobile phone. So there's no reason for them to hang around, and they're encouraged to move on as quickly as possible. As we said in our group, it's as much about the perception of the event from the person outside as it is about the safety of the participants and the volunteers. And if we can make people feel safe and make the public accept what's happening as acceptable, then we'll continue to move forward instead of going backwards. So I think that was kind of the bottom line from our discussion, Maddie. I don't know if you've got anything else to add on to that.
That was great then. I guess the only other things we spoke about, just to kind of last little bit about making sure volunteers were still appreciated despite kind of having to shoo them away at the end. And Glenn made a good point about he'd given them little goodie bags with hand san and hand warmers and things. And we had a bit of chat as well about toilets, just for some HQs that won't have them, and kind of how we get around that. I think that would be a bit of a work in progress, but yeah, and just how events look to kind of people who aren't involved in them. So kind of your passerby, how does the event look to them? And that's kind of how to know if it's like covering all bases, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that was pretty much everything we talked about.
Yeah, sounds like another really good discussion in your room as well. So, I mean, that brings us nicely to the end really of tonight. I hope you've got a lot out of it. That is just about 8:30 when we're scheduled to finish. But as I said, you're welcome to stay and have some general questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to get events back on. I mean, it's been like tumbleweed, I'd say, in the office, but you know, I've not seen the office in a long time. So it's so great to see all these time trials and all these other events coming back on the calendar. Tomorrow, I'll send out any extra documents that we've spoken about and share the presentation. There wasn't much to it, but I'll also send out a wee evaluation. So please do let me know if you found this useful, what else would have been helpful, because I am hoping to, well, I have scheduled to run these for the other disciplines as well, and I just want to make these as valuable as possible for you guys, because you're the ones out there on the ground doing these great events. So thank you very much. So that's the end of the official session for tonight, but there's a few questions in the chat if people want to stay and continue for a little bit. And yes, there's somebody, Glenn, for coming up to Scotland to help us and have a really good chat about what you've actually been doing. Thank you so much.
Can I ask, just in case Glenn, sorry, it's Barry, Ashley, just in case Glenn's going away, can I ask Glenn, I envisage that one of the biggest problems will not actually be the race, it will be round about the headquarters area. Obviously with riders coming in, riders going out, etc., and I get the moving it on. Obviously, generally for the headquarters I use, we've basically said that we'll only use the toilets and we'll use their parking facilities and not actually the building, as Glenn spoke about earlier. But obviously a lot of our riders have warmed up on turbos behind their cars, so I would expect that, have you obviously been against that in the CTT events down south and suggested that they did what they used to do many years ago before turbos existed and go out and warm up on the road? Is that kind of the feeling behind riders down south?
Yeah, so so the very first event that we, sorry, I've just lost my headphone. So the very first event that we didn't allow any turbos. What that resulted in was everybody turning up early and parking in the car park and then going off and riding on the roads, or they would find a lay-by and they would go in the lay-by. So we'd end up with all the lay-bys within a few miles radius of the headquarters with several cars in it with their turbos. So we then took the view that actually we'd prefer them to be contained, where we can keep an eye on them and we can give them some procedures that they must follow. So what we basically said is that they can turbo either directly in front or behind their vehicle, and only one person. So if you've got cars parked appropriately, then that'll give us the social distancing that's needed. But it also means that the lay-bys in the local area aren't all being filled with cyclists on turbo trainers. So again, it comes down to this perception, and actually the perception of an event happening in 7 different locations, as opposed to one location where you've got it managed with marshals in high vis, where somebody knows they can come and talk to you, is very different to having it spread out where you've got no control.
Okay. The other thing that I would envisage that there'll be a problem with is obviously generally what happens, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is at the start line, all the riders take off their jacket, they get chucked in the timekeeper's car or on the grass. And I know that we're not going to have that. But on most of our courses, one of my slight concerns is on most of our courses, we would be okay because the riders would then have to probably cycle past the start to get to the headquarters where their car is or whatever. Whereas we have one course where the riders, where it starts, the riders would actually have to, they'd be finished, they'd have to come back out and cycle up a hill and probably join in if they were picking up their jacket. So would you recommend that they then leave their jacket down at their car when they're cycling up for that type of course?
Yeah, I mean, we have a rule which most clubs seem to be taking on, in that we don't allow a return to the start at the moment, because we're limiting the amount of people in the start area.
Yep.
And they're generally the start timekeeper, the social distancing officer, and 5 riders. So any addition to that would burst our bubble, if you like. So they're being given strict instructions not to return to the start. So if they want to throw their jersey or jacket in a bush a mile up the road, that's their responsibility. But yeah, they're not allowed to return to the start area.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay.